What is up, everyone? Welcome to the channel. It's Viking Actual here. We've already done the first part of this video, so we're looking at builds, giving you some inspiration about what you want to make your builds. If you're theory crafting or you're putting your own build, using one of my builds, want to swap things out. And we looked at the defensive sets in one of the previous videos. So if you haven't looked at that, go and check that out. There are 5 top defensive sets for your back bar. So definitely go and check that out. It is the other half of this. On the flip side, we're going to look at our offensive sets today. I'm going to try and rattle through them as fast as I possibly can because there are so many good front bar sets. I think in total we have about 8. There are loads. So I'm going to try and rattle through, keep the video as short as possible while still retaining the same amount of detail. So, without further ado, to get started. Right now, I think this is probably our top offensive set. I've seen it used loads. It's a great sustain set, but also a great damage set. And it is featured as my front bar, back bar, but front bar set on the Berserker build. That is Essence Thief. So your 2 and 3 piece give you 1096 maximum stamina. So really good if you're a stamina build, because it just, well, no matter whether it's front bar, back bar, it will constantly be giving you that extra stam resource pool. 4 piece will give you weapon and spell damage. Obviously on the front bar, that's really important to have extra weapon and spell damage, because that will increase your damage. Also any heals over time that you've got that have carried over from your back. But the main pièce de résistance is the 5 piece. So dealing damage with a light or heavy attack draws essence from the enemy that creates a pool near them for 5 seconds, and drawing from that pool gives you health, stamina, and increases your damage done by 10%. It is huge. It is like a sustain set and a damage set all rolled into one. And they aren't small figures either, so 4,000 health, 4,000 stamina, and then 10% increased damage for 10 seconds. And you can have 100% uptime if you are good at proccing it, and you are good at collecting it, because it can be created once every 10 seconds. So right now, I think this is probably the top PvP front bar set, just because of how versatile it is in both sustain and damage. Next, this is a bit of an old but gold. We're looking at Stuhn's Favor. Now this is quite an old one. It is craftable, which is quite nice. We'll get into the 2 and 4 piece, so they're both weapon and spell damage, so really nice boost to those weapon and spell damage statistics, with a 3 piece of offensive penetration, 1000, nearly 1500 penetration. So really nice, pure offensive 2, 3 and 4 pieces there. And then the 5 piece, which is really interesting, if you're lacking that penetration, that when you deal off balance to an enemy, your offensive penetration is increased by 5,300 for 10 seconds. With all the subclassing, it is so easy now to set an enemy off balance that you can be doing it nearly all the time. There is no cooldown to it either, so if you have this on your front bar and you're lacklustering for that penetration, it is really easy to keep that penetration up. And if you're pairing this with something like Necromancer that already has a lot of penetration, your base penetration is going to be huge, which is going to give you the maximum amount of offensive penetration. Which is why Stuhn's Favor is solidly on this list. Next, I play a DK class base. You must have known it's going to be on here. Pyrebrand. Once again, like the other one, the 2, 3 and 4 are weapon and spell damage, and then 2 weapon and spell damage and 1 offensive penetration. Super solid offensive 2, 3 and 4 pieces, exactly like the other one. I won't need to touch on that anymore, but really solid. I think we've also touched on this before looking at one of my PvP builds, but your light attacks deal flame damage over time. So when I've buffed up, it gets to about 5,000, 6,000 over 6 seconds. So 1,000 damage a second off of just a light attack. It is amazing. The pressure of the build, epic. Your fully charged heavy attacks then consume 3 of your damage over time effects to deal damage in a radius of 6 meters, dealing 200% more damage to enemies below 33 health. So you get 33% health. So you get that execute damage as well. And that is then increased a further 60%, 20% for every dot that you've removed. So if you're running a dot build that you've got loads of dots in them, absolutely fantastic. A really, really nice offensive build. It's been nerfed, but I would still say that it is still really, really solid at keeping pressure up, especially if you're spec'ing to flame damage or spec'ing to dot damage. It is the only set that you really need for a Frontbar. Not to mention, it's a class set. You can get it on all types of armor weights, light, medium, heavy. So there's also that versatility as well. Moving on from raw damage sets, we're going to move to damage over time and stats effects. So the first half of that first section was just raw damage. Now looking at damage over time. So starting off, deadly strikes. Once again, it's got 2 weapon and spell damage, so 2 and 4 piece, but this time instead of penetration it gives you a 3 piece in critical strike chance. So this is a bit more leaning towards dealing crit damage, so making those those damage over time crit. And then the 5 piece increases the damage of your damage over time effects and channeled attacks by 15%. So if you're running dot build, super powerful keeping that pressure up. They're not able to heal through your dots, keeping them lower health, so really nice there. And even if you're running something like an Arcanist or Radiant Oppression, something that's a channeled effect, really nice 15% buff. You know, if you put that on a Necromancer and then you run oh gosh, what's it called, the other morph of Blast Bones, you're looking easily at what, I think 10% for the passive, so what, 40% increased damage, just your dots. An amazing front bar set if you want to go down that route. Another one, which is relatively new, come out in one of the new dungeons, that is also quite good, exactly the same 2, 3 and 4, but almost as an alternative, is Zanmeer's Spellweaver. A really nice set. So like I said, the 2, 3 and 4, exactly the same, critical strike chance with 2 weapon and spell damage. The 5 piece, increasing your damage done with flame, frost and shock damage by 5%. That's just a flat. Then increasing your damage done with burning, chilled and concussion by 15%. If you're running a Dragon Knight subclassed with, I don't know, maybe you've taken one of the sorcerer passives and you're running it with Hurricane or, you know, that skill line of Storm Calling, that means you're getting 10% increased damage to your flame attacks, 10% increased damage to your shock attacks. It's a really nice set to boost those elemental numbers. So that's a really nice, more elemental, maybe less to do with the dots, but obviously if you're running Dragon Knight, there's a lot of dots that are flame related, so could be boosting your dots, could be boosting your raw damage, but it is one of the new sets. It has been very powerful from what I have seen. Another one that's quite an old one, but I've still used it. It is really nice. It is another one that works off of almost an elemental status effect, but it does give you that kind of raw damage, so it's a bit of a mix of the both. So Burning Spellweave. The 2 piece will give you extra magic pool, 1996. The 3 piece gives you 129 weapon spell damage, and then the 4 piece gives you critical strike chance. So it's a bit of a mix of resources, weapon spell damage, and then obviously a critical chance. The 5 piece, when you deal damage with a flame ability, you apply the burning status effect, so that's a guaranteed. So if you're pairing it with something else that increases that, that's really good. But then it also boosts your weapon and spell damage by 490 for 8 seconds, and this can occur every 12 seconds. So you nearly have 100% uptime on that, and that is a higher return than something like Major Courage. So really nice boost to your weapon and spell damage, which not only benefits your offensive but also benefits your defensive. So arguably, if you didn't need a back bar defensive set, you could slot this in. Then moving on to the more kind of critically inclined ones. There is definitely one here that is craftable. I'm sure everyone has heard of it. Everyone has used it at some point. It is amazing. It is a stable for certainly some of my Nightblade builds. Order's Wrath. Craftable, so you can get it in any weights that you want in terms of the armor. You know, it is very obtainable because it is also craftable. Heavily spec'd into crit, so the 2 and 4 piece increasing your critical chance, with a 3 piece increasing your weapon and spell damage. So heavily spec'd into offensive, heavily spec'd into critical. The 5 piece gives you even more critical chance as a bonus to the 5 piece, and then the 5 piece increases your critical damage and critical healing by 8%. So if you proc Vigor on the back bar, this will also benefit that, because your crit chance will be going through the roof, which means that it will be critical more likely, and it will critical harder because of the extra 8%. So really, really nice critical damage set. Pairing this with some of the critical damage CPs in the blue skill tree and stuff, you then run Major Force, Minor Force, Monomyth. This is how you're going to get that critical damage super high as you're hitting high numbers, if you are going to be going with what the meta is currently, which is critical. The next one, this one's from a trial, so this one's a little bit harder to obtain, but has had amazing results in PvP. This is Perfected Slivers of the null arca. So you're mainly not worrying about the 3 piece, because that is only for arenas, trials and dungeons, so all PvE. But looking at the 2 and 4 piece, increasing your critical strike chance, so really nice for the current meta if you're trying to hit criticals more often. And then the 5 piece increases your weapon and spell damage as an extra bonus, so a bit like Order's Wrath. That's really nice, basically free weapon and spell damage. And then dealing critical strike damage gives you a stack of silver for 10 seconds, up to once every 0.5 seconds. After gaining your 3rd stack, you merge a crystal and it deals 1952 physical damage, and that scales off of your weapon and spell damage. So if you're running something that's got quite high weapon and spell damage, so for mine sometimes goes up to about 6,000, that is really going to be a really nice chunk damage that's just proccing every now and then. Now I've kind of lumped it in with the critical damage sets, because it procs off of critical damage, so you're going to be wanting to hit that critical damage as much as possible with high crit chance. But obviously raw damage being dealt, it's just a nice set to have that just kind of offers you that little bit extra burst to get them low. We then move on to, this one was kind of nerfed, but I still see it used all the time. I don't think I've been in PvP lately without being hit by it. It may be less effective, but it is still definitely usable. That is Tarnished Nightmare. Once again, it's a dungeon set. This one is super procced into critical damage. So the 2, 3 and 4 piece all give you critical strike chance. So it's going to push your chance of criticals through the roof just on that. When you then deal critical damage to an enemy, glass bursts out of them around them in an 8 meter radius after 1.3 seconds, dealing physical damage to them and enemies. And it applies the Sundered effect, which implies Major Breach, which means that their resistances are also impacted by this. The damage also scales off of your weapon and spell damage, so a little bit like the null arca. If you're running something with high weapon and spell damage, it's going to hit hard. It's going to hit hard, it's going to hit in that area, and it's going to apply minor breach in an area of effect around it. So, you know, team applications, 1vx, all very possible because you've used this. I've seen it used very often. It is still it is still effective, even though it has been nerfed. Then, looking at our kind of bomber builds, I want to try and cover all areas. So bomber builds, I've got Rush of Agony. You can use it if you're not on bomber build. I'm not saying it's exclusive to a bomber build, but I think rather than using like Dark Convergence and stuff, I think this is quite a nice one that has got a very easy, very useful proc. So using, well, we'll go through the 2, 3 and 4. So the 2-piece gives you stam recovery. Recovery is always nice. Sustainability is always nice, especially in open PvP, because you're always using those resources, so you're always wanting them back. 3-piece giving you weapon and spell damage, which is super important to boost all of that damage. It's also on the 3 set, so it can boost your heals. The 4-piece then increasing your offensive penetration, so you can hit through the armor of an enemy. The 5-piece, dealing direct damage with a blink, charge, leap, or teleport or pull ability. So for example, if I had this on my Berserker build, the critical rush would not only proc my Maelstrom Arena Greatsword, it would also proc this. Will pull enemies within 12 meters of where you've hit after 0.8 seconds, and then after 2 seconds deal physical damage to all enemies within 7 meters of you. And then this effect can occur every 8 seconds and scales off the higher of your weapon and spell damage. So it just pulls everyone together, which is why I'm lumping it in with the bomber builds, because you want to get everyone together before you drop something like Pestilent Colossus, or you want to drop, I don't know, if you've managed to make a bomber leap build. But you want everyone close together so that you can deal large amounts of damage all at once. Now I'm going to come on to another set which I really like that would highly benefit getting everyone together and then wiping even one person out. But then obviously using like proc detonation, getting them all close together, because the more people it hits, the more damage it deals. So Rush of Agony, you can use it without being a bomber, but I would say is in the bomber category for me. And then finally, sticking with bomber builds, I've used this one before, sometimes not even necessarily as a bomber build, because if you've managed to find that one weak target, you know, kind of the killer instinct in you has gone after the weakest one in the pack, it is really nice if they're close together to be able to deal the level of damage this puts out to the other ones, the other people around them. So for our last one, I've went for Vicious Death. I know that a lot of other people use things like Blade Break. There's a lot of other builds out there that, you know, that will use other bomber sets. For me, this is my favourite, and I think it has applications outside of just bombing. So the 2-piece gives you weapon and spell damage, 3-piece increasing your magicka resource pool, and then the 4-piece giving you extra crit chance. Looking at the 5-piece, you get a bonus of penetration, so that means you've got weapon and spell, you've got critical chance, and you've got offensive penetration, as well as then you've got an extra 1000 magicka, which is basically just a nice buff. So you've got all of the offensives plus magicka in just the 2, 3, 4, and then a bonus 5-piece. So really nice to cover all aspects, very versatile. But the main part of the 5-piece is when you kill a player, they violently explode for 3322 flame damage to all other enemies in a 5 meter radius, and that effect scales off your weapon and spell damage. Flame damage, so I used to run it on my DK, because obviously all the buffs that you get to flame damage would then obviously buff this, but then obviously if you've got something else that's got really high weapon and spell damage, it is amazing. Like when you're all buffed up, that can go up to 15,000 damage. Take that into PvP, that's 7,500 damage as a burst in an area to all enemies around you, or all enemies around that player. If you find that weak link in the pack that is 22,000 health and take them out, you've instantly got a really nice start on the rest of the group where they're already starting low. So that is one of my main bomber build sets. Yeah, I don't think there are any others. And that is it. That is all of my favourite offensive PvP sets. I've kind of rattled through that as fast as I possibly can. I'm sure I will have missed some off. If you think I have, drop them in the comments. I'd love to look into it. And maybe I do a revised one in a couple of months and we have a look at it again. Maybe my opinions have changed. Maybe the meta's changed. We aren't dealing with maybe critical as much. And there are new sets emerging that are really good. As always though, I hope you really enjoyed. If you have, please consider liking and subscribing. It's really appreciated. As a small channel, every subscriber counts, every view matters, and certainly all of your feedback that has been given constructively is really important to me. So make sure you're liking, subscribing and commenting, so that I know which direction that I need to be going in. But as always, thank you very much, and I will catch you in the next one.